Hey guys, Peter here to tell you about the latest from Slaegt, Goddess, out March 18th on Century Media. This album has 6 tracks, 40 minutes in length, and this is the band's 4th full-length studio album. They are a Danish blackened heavy metal band. As far as the design goes, this record doesn't really have a positive or negative impact on how you're going to perceive it. The album is very straightforward, is very linear. There are some ebbs and flows, but they're very small nuances that exist within the songs, but not necessarily from track to track. The overall experience that you get from this record is one that stays on its path. It never really veers off. That gives it that balance, that gives it that consistency, and it doesn't allow those nuances to really dictate your perception of the record all around. The only thing that changes in this album as far as the construction is concerned is the placement of the last track, Goddess. This song, due to its characteristics, due to its length, it really has to be the closing track of the album. I couldn't see any other song fitting that bill. But outside of that, all of the other tracks, you can move them around, and the engagement, the soundscape, the experience that this album has would be unhinged. Nothing would really change, and that is definitely one of the prospects that this album has in store for the listener. An album that lives off of the intensity and the creativity that exists within each and every single song, but not necessarily on how they're going to cooperate or coexist with one another in the context of the record. As far as the sound goes, this is classic heavy metal with blackened elements, so it's very old school in its approach. It's very grimy, it's very raw, it's very gritty. But that is the starting point on every single track. That doesn't mean that the whole journey within those tracks stays consistent. I felt that there were some rock and prog rock elements coming to life within these songs. They don't have a driving factor. They don't become predominant in terms of what are you going to take out of the soundscape of this record, but they definitely have an impact on how you're going to perceive these tracks and how easy they are or become as far as you digesting and interacting with them. Making the tracks move a little bit more, making the tracks have a sense of expanding and contracting, making them feel like they have a little bit more texture, a little bit more substance, because the overall soundscape of this record is very thin. Like I said earlier, very raw, very gritty, and you feel like the sound is just dissipating, is just traveling, but it doesn't really have substance behind it. It doesn't have the necessary texture to make the overall experience a little bit thicker, making the volume a little bit bigger. This is a very penetrating sounding record. At times it feels like you're scratching through a blackboard. That's kind of the aspect that this record has in terms of the overall experience that it gives. And when you look at the drums, for example, the drums don't have a lot of power. They have an impact in terms of how they move the songs along, in terms of the momentum that they create within the tracks themselves, but they don't really have force behind them. They dissipate as all the sound does throughout this entire album. The same thing could be said for the guitars. The only time the guitars feel a little bit more alive, or they feel like they have a little bit more behind them, is in the solos. The solos on this album are actually really interesting. I really enjoyed what they did with them because they expose the songs a little bit more. They allow the tracks to breathe a little bit better, and some of those progressive elements really come to life and how the solos are created in terms of where they're spotted within the tracks, and then obviously what do they give to the songs and to the listener. One of the bright spots that this album has is definitely the guitar solos throughout. The guitar sound could be better, could be more together. I felt like it was a little bit all over the place. It didn't have necessarily a pattern or a style. Sometimes very driven, very penetrating, sometimes a little bit thicker with a little bit more volume behind it. And this inability to create some sort of pattern, some sort of guidance, doesn't help the overall sense of direction that the record should have. And that's my biggest problem with this album. I felt lost in it. I wasn't sure if I was going forward, if I was going backwards. The songs felt that they didn't have enough to offer. Once you peeled one layer, you're pretty much seeing everything that there is there. There's not much else underneath the surface. So the lack of direction, the lack of texture, the lack of substance is something that impacts this record on a negative side as far as the overall experience is concerned. Now, as far as favorite songs, I want to start off with Hunt Again. It's very driven, very penetrating, very raw, very gritty. The vocals match that atmosphere. The sound and vocals go hand in hand throughout the entire experience. And that is something that you're going to see throughout the entire album because the vocals are very consistent in terms of what they offer throughout this entire record. They never really change their pattern, they never really change their approach, and you're going to see it in the first song of the album, and you're going to see it pretty much throughout the entire existence of the record. This song is no different. There is a certain darkness to this track, and that darkness impacts not just the sound, but the atmosphere that that sound creates. It's a song that eventually becomes a little bit heavier and even more melodic. It forms and morphs. It grows ever so slightly. The solos are phenomenal because they always feel like they're adding energy to the track. They're adding a sense of brightness to the song, and it really helps counterbalance all that darkness, all that somber nature that the track carries forward from beginning almost all the way to the end, making the track even feel more dynamic, feeling like it has more ebbs and flows, allowing it to have more life, to be more engaging all around. Next you have Fealty Thunder Whip. This is a song that has a great intro. The intro really helps you ease into the song, and then once you ease into the song, it becomes a dark rock track all around. Tons of darkness in terms of how the vocals interact with the sound, how the sound interacts with the vocals. If you separate the two, the darkness is still there. It's a song that just has a very linear driven approach. It feels very direct into the point. It has a great atmosphere, but there's not much beneath that atmosphere. Just a very driven, direct sound and direct vocal approach that just takes you from point A to point B in the shortest distance possible. At least that's the sensation that it gives you. There are some nuances once you get to the chorus, but those nuances are really slight. They don't change that much the overall appreciation of the track or that sense of just going straight forward through it. All of that stays there. The nuances are there just to create this small little divide between what the verses are offering and what the chorus has in store. Outside of that is just a rock, heavy, metal, blackened track through and through, with some speed, with some momentum, with some grit in the mixture. As far as the last song is concerned, this is really the last song on the album, Goddess. This is my favorite track on the album. First of all, it's an epic track. 11 minutes in length, is the longest track on the album, but it's also the most textured song on this record. This song has a lot to offer musically. It really does. It's not a song that you get everything that it has at first glance. The more you listen to it, the more you're going to digest, and the more you're going to break it apart and see all the little different pieces that went into creating the sound, the experience that this track has. It sounds phenomenal. The vocals are phenomenal because they match that experience, they match that atmosphere. It has a great approach in terms of how it moves, and for a song that is 11 minutes in length, it doesn't feel it because it has great quality of approach, of execution, of sound, atmosphere, and vocals. There's layers, it's texture, it doesn't feel deprived of life, it doesn't feel deprived of soul. There's a lot more to it than at first glance. So it's a song that has this epic experience to it, and the way the sound comes across, and the way it feels, and the way you're going to perceive it. Phenomenal track to close off the album. I wish the record had more songs designed and executed in the way that this one is. It's just a phenomenal track all around, super memorable. This is it, Slaegt with Goddess, out March 18th on Century Media. Let me know your thoughts on the band, on the singles. Use the comment section below. I'll be reading those and getting back to you. Take care, guys.